Hi, welcome to the Lorcana Twins channel. On today's episode, we're going to recap the set championships that we participated in for the Archazia's Island set of Disney Lorcana.
Yeah, it's been a really fun season. There are a lot of variety in deck choices that are viable this time around. And yeah, we decided to play different decks at every event. We went to 4 total. So we're going to get into the different lists we played across those 4 events and how it all went.
Yeah, and we each decided to play, a different deck at each event so far. So we didn't do any repeats. We each kind of played some decks that each other tried at some point, but that's just because we really like those ink pairings. So we'll let you know how each event transpired.
Yeah, so in that case of doubling up, we won't go into the lists as long, but any insights we had from playing the deck that we feel important to share, we will. So yeah, I think it was a lot of fun, and as you can see here, we were competing to earn this nice Hiro Hamada promo card. I love the color combo with the sapphire and the emerald there, and it's really worked into the art really nice. And this was a card that when I saw it revealed for this set, it got me really excited. The deck hasn't, competitively panned out to, see too much play with this card, but there's a chance in the future that it might.
And I think Reign of Jafar got some new cards that could fit nicely into that Floodborn Emerald Sapphire archetype. So maybe I'll try it out then.
Absolutely. So for the first event, we'll get into the deck I played here. It was an Amber Steel Song deck. This has long been one of our favorite deck types to play. And so here we have the list. We have a lot of the standard things like the 4 Cinderella for singing, best 1-drop, couple Daisy, because it's not always my play style really to be super aggressive like that, and she's unequal, but there are matchups where she's really important to have. And the 4 Willpower helps set up Rapunzel's. And then the Robin Hood shift line. I think in this meta with a lot of the steel, when you can shift into that 5-cost Robin Hood, that 6 willpower he has is just really solid. And also if he, there's a lot of targets that have 3 willpower he can trade into, get you that 2 lore, heal him up with Rapunzel, and if he gets banished in a challenge, you get to draw cards, so that's great. I think what I really liked about this list is I had 4 of the Ursula and then 2 Troubadour as well. I think I really heavily valued that 4-cost Singer stat line. And yeah, it proved to be very effective in certain matchups where it's like, all of a sudden they have to worry about you singing Zeus on turn 3. So that was big. And then Smee, of course, one of the best 2-drops in the game. Ariel to find your songs. Lawrence for the good stats and lore. And Pete in this meta has been crucial too. So he's maxed out at 4 copies to stop your opponent from messing with you with any actions. Great in the mirror too. If your opponent is about to sing songs, you can hit him with the Pete. And then Naveen, I think we both have really enjoyed playing Naveen this set. Just the ability to play Naveen into a whole new world and then use your other characters that are already, ready to sing removal songs that you find in the new hand you draw, things like that. Or just, if you ever got in that position where you have to hard play a whole new world, it's better to just be able to develop a 2-lore threat at the same time.
He just kind of allows for more explosive combos than you could otherwise do without him.
And even if in the moment you have nothing better to play, sometimes you still just run him out because on the following turn he can sing for 6 if you do draw into a song. So that's just really nice there. And he quests for 2. And then Rapunzel, of course, amazing Amber card. 4 of in every deck that I would play of this type of deck. And then there's the Robin Hood. And I really liked the shift Cinderella. I think the just efficiency of being able to play the 1-drop for 1, and then at any point in the game, once you've got that 5 ink, she might shift up, threaten 3 lore, or be able to trade with warded characters sometimes, like Cogsworth or Prince John, which have found their way into the meta, I think is really crucial.
Yeah, going into turn 5, I think the opponent always has to worry that one of your small Cinderellas might become the big one, and she's a lot harder to deal with than the small one. So.
Mm-hmm. And if you don't have the shift, but they use their removal on her, your other characters get to stick around. So not a bad thing there. And then World's Greatest Criminal Mind, that's proven really good in the current meta. Sometimes there are some matchups where it has no relevance at all, but other times, there's Maui Sharks everywhere. There's I guess Cinderellas in a mirror match have potential. Just regular Maui's, big Sisus, there's a lot of targets, so that's been great. And then 4 of the Let the Storm Rage On, Strength of a Raging Fire, and Along Came Zeus. Again, those Maui Sharks, if they come down and you don't have an answer to it, it can kind of stall your whole game out and just give them the time they need to win. So I think maxing that out right now in the current meta was great.
And he answers a lot of other things too, like Genie and the Tamatoa that cost 6.
Yeah, because evasives can be challenging for this deck too. There are no evasives on our side of this deck, so you need that removal to take care of opposing evasives. So again, yeah, Along Came Zeus takes out most things for that cost level.
So you managed a top 8 finish with this deck, and what would you say was your toughest matchup on the day?
Well, I would say I faced 3 different Emerald Steels, and against one of them, I was able to have a decent bit of success, and then I drew once with the other one unintentionally. It was just that grindy. We went for quite some time, and then when I hit Emerald Steel again in the final with the one that I had drawn against, and I wasn't sure how it would go. It seemed like it could kind of break either way. And we were in game 3, and it had gone on quite long, and everyone else at the event was already done with their round. And we were both kind of top decking, so they had discarded my cards and ran out of their own. And then by the end of it, they did pull ahead and knock me out. But I was very pleased to start the Set Champ season with the top 8 and, lock down one of those hero promos. And now we'll get into what you played.
I decided to play a deck that I had basically 0 reps on because I just thought, our local scene, there was a high likelihood of some Emerald Steel discard, and I know I've always struggled against that when I'm on Amber Steel and other decks that I enjoy playing, and I had just heard that, this deck can kind of get out ahead of that, and the ward makes it difficult, for some of their actions. They can no longer target, a lot of your characters that they might want to target.
Right.
And so if you're able to amass enough lore early on, you can, get across the finish line. And so I just thought for a refreshing change of pace for me, last second, I kind of switched to this. I had seen that this list had done very well. Mm-hmm. It's very much in that Kiwi Birds type of style that just curves out aggressively. The thing I do like about this, against heavy steel metas, that Mickey Mouse 1-drop, that little point of resist usually means he's going to be able to quest at least once. So that's always nice. Calhoun's resist also is pretty clutch, and if you're against aggro decks that have bad stats, she can trade, get 2 lore, and then still stay on the board a lot of the time. The Robin Hood is great to combo with the shift line. So if you put a turn 3 Robin Hood into play, oftentimes against steel decks, that can be difficult for them to remove. And then sometimes they have to challenge into it and you draw a card off that, which is always nice because this deck does kind of run out of cards pretty quickly if you don't find Doc. Then Doc being just an amazing card draw tool. Once you've kind of spent out your hand, you can drop him down and refill with a couple more cards, and that's always pretty clutch. And then Smee, great quester. Alice, she's my favorite card in the whole deck. I think just it's so nice playing a character where there's almost nothing in the game that's going to remove that. So you feel confident you're going to get at least 2 lore out of her. And the ability to give ward to something when you quest, that kind of gives you that same sense of security for another turn. And, against decks like Amber Steel or Emerald Steel, they're going to have to challenge her because, actions just cannot target her. So if you can set up a nice defense for her with bodyguards, either the Pluto or the Chen Po, that really gives them a rough time, especially if they're playing kind of weaker statted units like a lot of the Emerald decks do. Mm-hmm. John Silver, he didn't work out for me so great that day because in the matches against Amethyst decks, usually they would just pick up the character that I said couldn't challenge and then used a Fox, to do some trading.
Or Maui.
Or Maui rushes in, and then, things like that can happen, but in board-based matchups where they don't have rush, he does feel really good there. Pete, of course, to protect your board and allow your things to keep questing and delay like a Be Prepared or other significant actions for a turn. Pluto, of course, with Alice, that just seems like the best way to lock them out.
That's a nasty combo
on curve, but I did have a lot of the Amethyst opponents I was against. They were able to get around it sometimes, just hitting in with something kind of weak and then maybe using a crab. And then sometimes they even had a Fox after that to take out my Alice from behind the Pluto. So when that happened, it might fall apart from there. But at least there are some decks that really struggle to deal with the Alice Pluto line.
Right, because that ward makes them challenge the Pluto, can't really use removal on it, and then Pluto, when he's at full health, hits for 5 strength, which takes out most things at that cost level. So very efficient there.
And
way to protect the Alice.
I was really liking the Cogsworth. If you were already doing well on board, suddenly it makes it just much harder for your opponent to challenge your stuff out. And then Alice, too, it's like she needs to be challenged, but if she has resist on top of some of the protection they might need to get through first, it can be hard to take her out, and the longer she lives, I think the more lore you just accelerate and the more protection you give to your board. Gantu, of course, is a good finisher with that 4 lore, especially if you can get that ward on him with Alice. There were some times where I just couldn't, ward him up, and then maybe an Elsa came down and tapped him, and then he doesn't feel as great. But if you get close to 16 and you have a way to protect him, it feels great to win with that card. McDuck Manor, great against Ruby decks if they ever have to wipe your board. It really never came up in my games. There were games I wanted it, but just didn't see it, and I think it really would have helped me out in my top 4 match. But and then Fire the Cannons, that was a really clutch card because I was against Emerald Steel 3 times that day, and I was always able to have one early on to answer a Diablo and then just kind of curve out and slowing them down and preventing all the card draw and the singing of 3-cost songs that they otherwise could have done. That really helped my tempo, and
it's nice it's not a song, so Ursula can't steal it from you.
Yep, so a lot to love about this deck. I think it's proven itself time and time again. I know this is like a direct copy of a deck that did very well. I think it might have been Jay Shaft, his list perhaps, and very similar also to what Harlan Sweet has done. So I thought it was a lot of fun.
The Kiwi Birds style deck.
It's kind of refreshing just playing a fast-paced deck where your opponent kind of needs to try to keep up with you. And the only times it wasn't fun was when it fell behind early, and then I don't have that much confidence in it as a late game deck. But my day was pretty good. I got to top 8. My top 8 opponent was Green Steel, which I had played earlier, and it was tougher in the top 8 match than it was in the Swiss rounds. I think the deck just worked a lot better for them, but I was able to kind of limp across the finish line in both games, and then in the top 4 I lost to a Ruby Amethyst Shark list, and I felt like my hand just kind of went nowhere. I never found any docks, and I did get to 19 at one point, but then a couple Pirates Lives happened, and that put me out of game 1, and then game 2, I just felt like the hand didn't really go anywhere, and they had a lot of rush characters, crabs, and then a Maui, and after that, I really couldn't establish a good board presence. So
the top 4, that was a success.
It was very fun.
Yep, and now the next event we went to the following day, I decided to play Blurple, as it's called, and that is Amethyst and Sapphire, and I decided to use the list on screen here. It was pretty similar to some lists that I'd seen, but then I kind of increased the counts of Bell compared to some, and I added in a couple Cusco and then a couple of the 7-cost Ursula there with 3 lore, trying to be a tech option against Steel Song, because I know this deck has a really rough time into Steel Song if they're firing on all cylinders. And, they try to go really wide, especially if they sing an early Whole New World and spam a bunch of characters. It can be really hard to call that back, so I thought she might be a good option there to deny some of the singing, which is what makes that deck so efficient. I do think it takes a little while to get up to that 7 ink to, deploy her to the board, so they can kind of pop off before you get to her anyway. But if you've kind of managed the board decently, she can be good there. 4 of the Hades, because it's just amazing for the removal. And in this deck, you really do not want to miss ramp on 2. I almost always that would be the preferred line of play, whether it's Tipo or Sail the Azurite Sea. So there's 4 of each of those in there to maximize the chances. And there's really no 1-drops in here except the Popsicle. And then you can, of course, play Popsicle and then banish it to deploy a Bell there, the 3-cost Bell.
That always feels pretty good.
And there were definitely some games where that happened, and it's even better if you have friends on the other side in hand to sing that with Bell the next turn. But that can really put aggro decks in their tracks. And, without the 1-drops, aggro decks are a little bit of a concern, especially if you're going to spend turn 2 ramping and then turn 3 deploying like a Genie or an Iago. But once you get to that 5 ink, especially if you deployed like an Iago the turn prior, you can play Elsa. There's 4 of her in here to exert your opponent's characters and then crash into it with Iago or Genie. And what I also really like about this color combo is that it is playing a lot of evasives, and there's a lot of evasive characters in the meta, but this deck can get to them faster thanks to the ramp. So I think it's really well positioned there. If you're afraid of Diablos, at least you've got a lot of characters that can kind of deal with him and make him not want to quest. Some other cards in here that I really liked, the 5-cost Bell. I don't know that I ever shifted her in any of the matches, but just even playing her on 5, really nice, especially if you get a nice trade with Iago. I mean, he's got a lot of willpower, so he can absorb a lot of damage, and then you can move up to 3 off onto a different character. So sometimes you can kind of get a 2-for-1 surprise if your opponent quests at a certain time when they maybe shouldn't have. And then Gaston, I really enjoy playing Gaston. He's 3 lore. He kind of replaces himself when you play him, and you get to take the best card out of the top 3 of your deck and add it to your hand, which is really nice depending on, it gives you flexibility based on what you need in the moment. And then also if you have a couple cards like Tipo or whatever that are kind of irrelevant at that point in the game because you've already ramped, you can just send those to the bottom and skip drawing them later. And then it's also nice that if you are against Diablo, this just adds the card to your hand. It doesn't count as drawing it, so they wouldn't get to draw with you. And then I played 3 Finders Keepers because I thought that was really important to refill your hand in some grindier matchups. And then I wanted One Let It Go because I really like the Hades effect, and sometimes maybe you need to sing it, like you might not have enough ink to dig for the Hades and play it at the same time. But if you already have a 5-cost singer established, like Elsa, after she's rushed in and the next turn she can sing that, it's really efficient and nice.
I mean, nobody lets it go like Elsa.
Exactly. And then the spiciest card is probably the Mufasa, Ruler of Pride Rock, that I included in here. And this is one of my favorite cards in all of Lorcana. I mean, the 4 lore, 4/9, it's just such a big body. And then the on-play effect, getting to return 2 cards from your Inkwell to your hand. That's just, to me, I viewed it as another way of card draw. So instead of playing like a 4th Gaston, I thought, some scenarios, maybe I want an even harder to remove character that'll get me 2 cards and threaten to close the game really fast, because that other ability that whenever you quest, you get to ready all your ink. I mean, you can have basically 2 turns in one with that effect and close the game really fast. So really fun card to have in there. And it did some work. It didn't come up too much, but that just meant it wasn't really necessary. But there was a game where it definitely helped close the game out before the opponent could try to come back. So was glad to have him in there, and I would definitely play him again just for the fun factor. But was able to make the top 8 of this event as well. And this was an event where it was 4 rounds, and so they cut directly to top 4. So I think I was the 6th seed at the end of the Swiss rounds. So because I wasn't quite in the top 4, I didn't get to compete and keep going in the tournament, but really was pleased again with this result and had fun playing a different deck.
And in that same event, I decided to play Amber Emerald discard-based strategy. This was a deck I've always enjoyed watching and playing before, but I've never brought it to a competitive event, and I wanted to do that here while it was still an option. And right now it seemed like it was in a decent place in the meta, although there is a lot of Diablo hate sometimes, so I did worry a little bit that might be an issue, but for the most part it went very well. So this list is pretty standard to what I've seen other people who kind of champion this deck play. It's got 4 Diablos to scout the hand on turn 1, and ideally, in a perfect world, you would have your 3-cost shift Diablo for turn 2 to start drawing you some cards and build up a hand advantage. Sir Hiss, I love him on turn 2 because he can sing a lot of the relevant 2-cost songs in this deck, which is nice to pair with Prince John on the following turn if you can drop him in. If you know you're against a song deck that might try to mess with you early, but maybe they have a Cinderella and they're getting ready to sing on their turn 2, then I like to drop in that Ursula Deceiver to kind of scout their hand and take a song. And if you've already seen their hand with Diablo, you might know there's some uninkable songs stuck in there. That can happen sometimes. So and then also Ariel, it's kind of, I love Amber Steel. It's fun to look for songs with her in that deck. But in this deck, I get the same amount of enjoyment out of it as well, because there's a lot of fun, different things you can do with the songs here. And she's just great to establish a Singer 5 on board, because, the main win condition with this deck tends to be sending all your opponent's characters under the sea. And to do that, you usually need, 8 cost worth of singers in play. So Ariel already being 5 of that 8 cost is very nice if she can stick on the board. I played 1 copy of Anna, just primarily for the discard effect. So if you have 5 ink, you can pay the extra 2 on top of the 3 it costs to play her and choose to discard a card from your opponent's hand. They get to pick. But then the other option I did use it for in some games was just to banish a damaged character, because a lot of times there were many Elsas or other evasive units were rushing in and trying to damage my characters. Like Ariel, they would tap down, and then I could play Anna later to finish off whoever had rushed in. And it's just nice to kind of keep the board a little cleaner while you're trying to set up your combo. Then Prince John, everybody's favorite card draw engine in the game for sure, because whenever your opponent discards a card, you get to draw a card, and that's another way that you try to win hand advantage with this deck is, get him on board and then start making your opponent discard. So often you might play him on 3 and then possibly sing Sudden Chill with Sir Hiss to kind of get that going. And then if you have a Diablo, you're also drawing on their turn. So, very quickly it can kind of get out of control if you find the pieces you need. The Daisy Duck just makes your opponent discard 1 card when you play her. So, you could go Prince John on 3 and then Daisy on 4 is a nice curve. And, she's essentially half the cost to sing Under the Sea as well. So that's not terrible to kind of get her established.
I will say it's nice that you can play her, like let's say you play the Prince John and your opponent plays a Pete. Then you'd be able to still play Daisy and make them discard a card, where your other actions that would, cause them to discard aren't able to be played. And you can also bounce her with the Muses back to hand and replay her, so that's cool too.
That's where that character-based discard like Anna and Daisy comes into play, and I know some people use Lucifer, or maybe you tried to Lucifer, I'm not sure, but we'll get to your list later. So I like those, and then the Muses is kind of one of the all-star 4-drops in most matchups. It's not always great, if there's a lot of 3 strength and higher things on your opponent's side of the field, but whenever you play a song, the Muses can bounce something back to hand with 2 strength or less, and there's ways to manipulate strength in this deck, such as with Painting the Roses or with the Kita when you play her. Usually you look for her later on to kind of complete your combo, but if you drop her in, the strength of all characters in play gets reduced by 3. So most Under the Seas after that will, remove your opponent's board. Only if they had something pretty big would it maybe get around the Under the Sea combo. But there's other ways to deal with that as well. The We Don't Talk About Bruno is a very strong song in this deck as well, because even Ariel can sing this starting on turn 4 just to bounce something back to your opponent's hand, and then they discard at random. And sometimes you get a card out of their hand that you're really glad to see hit the discard pile. And if you have John in play, you're drawing when they're discarding. So it's just you're building all these advantages.
And if they don't have any cards in hand, then it's basically guaranteed to remove whatever you send back. Unless it's a shifted character and they would get both back to hand, then it's kind of a 50-50. But really nice that it's basically guaranteed removal when they have no hand.
Yeah, and at that point it's kind of like a singable Dragonfire. If they have no hand, it's definitely going to the discard, and that feels really great and efficient. Then this deck does struggle a little bit for stats, for strength specifically. So the Cricky then on 5 can buff all your characters by +3 strength, so that can be helpful for removing locations or making some favorable trades later on in the game when you're just trying to clean up the board. Then You Have Forgotten Me makes your opponent discard 2 cards from their hand, so that's very powerful after you play a Prince John on turn 3, and can, if your opponent's not being careful with their hand, if they're down to those 2 cards, you can get the last 2 out, and then suddenly you have options and they don't, and maybe they have 3 cards, and You Have Forgotten Me, and maybe that finds you a Sudden Chill that you can sing to get their 3rd card. So there's a lot of ways you can do some surprising hand destruction in one turn.
Yeah, that's what I think is really appealing about this deck to play, is that I think of all the discard decks, it kind of discards the opponent's hand the fastest, and it's got a lot of interesting tools to make that happen. So, and then it's pretty cool, especially the Under the Sea combo. I really like how thematic a lot of decks in Lorcana seem to be, where this is using a lot of Ariel franchise themed cards with the Ursula and the Ariel and the Under the Sea card. Yep. And it's just cool that they're synergized well like that. You can tell they thought about it when they were designing them. So
absolutely. And then just a few other actions being played in this deck. The Bare Necessities, you can look at your opponent's hand and discard a non-character. So there were some decks like Blurple doesn't have a lot of non-characters usually, but so there's some matchups where it's better against than others. So anything like Amber Steel, Emerald Steel, that's a matchup I would want to see the Bare Necessities.
And the nice thing about that too is, Blurple plays a lot of Finders Keepers, and that's an action but not a song. So a lot of your song targeting discard cards don't work, but Bare Necessities can take that, or locations or items or whatever you need.
There is a chance to hit that. It didn't happen for me that day, but it's always possible. And locations too, I think this deck struggles with a bit, and so if you can get a location early, that's good. Strike a Good Match is just to kind of help with a little bit of cycling if your hand is bad, and then Sudden Chill, of course, traditional discard song, and then the Hidden Cove. That can really help your Diablo survive in the early game, and ultimately once you've set up 8 costs worth of singers, if you can find that Kita and send their board Under the Sea, if you've also discarded their hand at that point, the game is probably in your favor. So it was a very fun event. I think the the first matchup was against Ruby Amethyst, and that was just, I drew pretty much perfectly, and I think that's a great matchup for this deck. I did then struggle a little bit. I had some very close games with Emerald Amethyst discard version. We were both kind of top decking, and I had my combo ready to go, and then they dropped an Ursula on me, and so that kind of ruined my Under the Sea chances there. And I feel like the game probably would have went to me if that had not been interrupted. And then a similar thing kind of happened the second game, but that's just kind of the way the cards fall out. And then I also had a rough match against Blue Purple, where I felt like those were the worst hands I'd seen all day. Like, just nothing came together at all. I couldn't find the Diablo Shift line. I couldn't find Prince John. So I just had no like value engine to do anything with. So those games were pretty bad losses. And then I managed to beat an Amethyst Steel in round 4 that was pretty well teched for the Diablo matchup, but they had some unfortunate draws in game 1, which allowed me to kind of grind it out and take it in game 3. So at the end of that, we cut to top 4, and I finished right in 8th. So I at least got the hero card, which I was excited about because I knew I was going to be right on the fringe there. Would have loved to continue to try this deck further in the top cut, but I was happy to at least get that top 8.
And I forgot to mention my matchups, but I can just quick run through them. I played against an Emerald Amethyst discard, the one you played as well. And I think just all the evasives in my deck and being able to get to them fast enough really helped against all the evasive Diablos and other characters they were trying to play. So I was able to get that done. The discard was tricky though, so it was a 2-1. It was close, and then I ended up facing one of my friends who was on Emerald Steel with Chief Bogo and the whole combo with the Return of Hercules and Prince Philip, I believe.
And they bogoed you pretty hard,
and they got me 2-0. Yes, that was that was pretty rough. I played an Amber Steel, and they were able to, it was a draw. We had each won one game, and then we went to turns in game 3, and neither of us were able to get to 20. So would have been interested to see how that would have shaken out. But I know that was a really rough matchup for Blurple, so I was happy to win game 1 and then try to go from there. I think I did have a pretty good curve game 2, but they were popping off pretty hard. But that was fun, and yeah, that was 3 of the matchups. And then for the last one that I had to win to get into the top 8, I faced Emerald Steel. And again, I was pleasantly surprised with how well the evasives were able to check the opposing Diablos. And then once you'd remove a Diablo, I'd be able to cast Finders Keepers. So now they didn't have a Diablo in play. I just wanted to keep my hand really full. And so the Prince John, while they had it, wasn't able to discard enough of my hand. So that was fun to finally get over the top of them with a deck like this. But yeah, that was a fun event. And so then fast forwarding to the next weekend, I decided to try some Emerald Amethyst at the first one we went to. This was another one local to us. And so I was really intrigued just by being able to play like 8 1-cost Diablos and 3 of the 2-costs plus 4 of the shift. It seems like if you're ever going to shift Diablo, this is probably the most likely deck to do it with. And yeah, after facing like a lot of discard decks in the first 2 events, I thought, well, why don't I give that a spin myself? Because it feels pretty effective when your opponent has to really manage their resources, without over inking or playing their cards out in case you get their important ones that are left in their hands. So yeah, you've got the Ursula again to steal songs. And then what I also really liked about this deck, in addition to it having a lot of evasives to also deal with the meta or just be able to quest freely if your opponent doesn't have evasives themselves, I really like the good stats and combat tricks that the Amethyst adds with the Madam and Fox and the Merlin Crab. And then the Prince John, there's only a couple in here, but it did not seem hard to, find him. And in the matchups where you really wanted to focus on discarding, you could just, keep him for sure if you found him in the mulligan. And then there's, 4 Sudden Chill, 4 Hypnotize, and 4 we don't talk about Bruno. So, plenty of discard cards to find in the deck. And then with the draw from the friends on the other side, and Genie that draws you a card, and the 1-cost Diablo on Banish, like a lot of ways to cycle through your own deck. Improvise as well lets you add a strength to any of your characters and then draw a card, so that's a nice little cycle there. And it does, come up quite a bit where that extra strength helps you get a trade you otherwise wouldn't be able to get. And I will say too, in the current meta with a lot of Iagos flying around, You can just cast that on an opposing Iago, and then it'll just auto banish their Iago since it has the vanish keyword, and you get to draw a card at the same time for 1 ink. And that actually did come up in one of the matches, so that was very nice there to see it come into play. And yeah, I mean, this is just using a lot of the Amethyst cards that the Blurple was using. So as far as my matchups went, I had a mirror match against the same colors, but I will say I won the first game, and then game 2 they whipped out the Emerald Chromacon on me, which was really effective and completely bowled me over in game 2. And then game 3 I thought I had a really good curve, like I was really liking it, but again they played down the Emerald Chromacon, and I just was not able to use my stuff to remove their characters as I would have liked to, because of the tempo loss that the Chromacon was causing me to get as a result was just too much. And I also couldn't really just quest freely willy-nilly, because then that was opening me up to them just playing a quickie and blowing my board out. And so really tried to grind it to the end, but lost there. And then I had to take on a blue steel Kiwi type build. Was able to get the 2-0, but that was really close. Opponent was at like 18 in both games. And then I faced Chernadog build, and it was a very aggressive version of that. And I pushed that to game 3, and again that was pretty tight, but was able to close it out in game 3, and that one actually almost went to time as well. And then had the 4th round, which was needed to win to get into the top 4, and again this event was cutting to top 4. So I knew I would need to win that and go 3-1 on the day. But it was against Blurple, so I was kind of worried knowing that they're going to be able to ramp, get their bigger stuff out faster than me, and that they'll have plenty of evasives to deal with mine. So wasn't super excited about the matchup, but, wanted to give it my best, and I was able to push it to game 3, and then that's where I lost. So I did make the top 8, but not the top 4, so I did not get to keep playing. But I really enjoyed this deck too, and just had been enjoying the variety of trying a different deck every time. And yeah, I think this one, what I also liked was that it's very light on the uninkables. There were maybe only 10 uninkables in the deck, I want to say. And also with nothing costing more than 5, like it's a really efficient deck where I think you're always going to probably find a pretty good curve and something to work with, whereas some decks, you can brick pretty hard. I thought this was pretty consistent, so really enjoyed that. And now we will see what you played.
Well, when I'm not sure what to do, I usually go back to the Amber Steel songs, and I wanted to do it at least once this championship season. So after the prior weekend, and I kind of thought about what to play throughout the week, and I really couldn't settle on anything. So the night before, I decided to go back to Amber Steel and give it a try. This version was actually a direct copy of, I think, Poisonous, his build.
Okay.
So I've tried a lot of different builds of Amber Steel. I've made my own in the past, and this set I've more just been kind of like maybe tweaking things that are out there, just for time, saving purposes. But what I did like about this list is that there was no Daisy, and I knew that could be a bad thing against, let's say, Ruby Sapphire decks, because you really need to try to race out ahead of them before they get their kind of late game machine churning. But I was pretty sure someone at our event, Jeebus, was going to be there, and I know one of his favorites is Ruby Sapphire, so I did think taking the Daisies out might be a problem, but I did like the consistency of not giving your opponents extra cards against some of the Amethyst matchups, and so I decided I'll just play a deck with no Daisies and see how that goes. And then this one is on Ursula instead of the Troubadour, but I do like her extra willpower for the Rapunzel value, potentially drawing 3 cards off of her. And I also like the 4 Lawrence here. I just think that 4 willpower for some decks, especially ones that don't have like removal from hand that can like just take this out in one hit, he's probably towering over some 3/3s, and if they ever feel like they need to start challenging you, if he gets a good trade, that's going to draw you 3 cards off of Rapunzel if you have that combo in hand. So huge fan of the Lawrence. There are times when he feels like you wish he did something else besides just have good stats, but for what he does, he's pretty effective. Then this deck has 3 Naveen, which I like. I know in set 5 I was playing 4, and I still always kind of like want to go back to 4, but there are times when it's just not the right moment for him. And there's a lot of Pete's and Ursulas that, can kind of try to interrupt what he wants to do. So understand not going to the full four, but I think he's really fun and just helps the deck pop off in ways that it otherwise couldn't.
And you have the shift aerial in there.
And I really love the shift aerial. I think just naturally playing aerial on 3, I mean, if she's ever not removed, if she suddenly becomes a 3/8, like the stats she gains from becoming a 3/8 from a 2/3 is really immense. And then if she's not removed, by the following turn, you can start singing and just paying 2 to deal 3 damage. And against aggro decks, that really helps you clean up the board. And there's always a limited number of songs in a deck that you can use for removal, so it's helpful to kind of get a little extra mileage out of your songs when you have that aerial in play. And against other steel decks, it's just very hard for them to come up with 8 damage, in an efficient manner. So I find like once she's on the board in some matchups, she usually sticks there, or they spend a lot of effort trying to get rid of her, and then that, even just doing that, might put them in a bad spot.
And then another difference, it looks like, is you played Grab Your Sword. So how did that pan out?
So I did really like the one copy of Grab Your Sword, especially in the match to get to the top cut, because after A Whole New World, like, they were pretty wide with a bunch of little Diablos and Tipos and things like that, and just I found that card, was able to sing it, and it probably knocked out like 4 or 5 characters total, and put a couple other ones in a range where they either have to trade, and get banished into my stuff, or I could just ping them off with other little damages here and there. So I really did like that, and knowing like there's usually a lot of aggro at some of these more local events, it felt like a good card to have, and only having one of it doesn't feel that bad, if it's a bad card in a matchup.
I do like the idea of it, just with all the Prince Johns that are out there. Like, I didn't like in my deck when I played Amber Steel, knowing that the only way I could hit a Prince John was if I, shifted a Cinderella and then played a song and was able to challenge it that way. But, sometimes it's not necessary all the time, but I definitely think it could certainly catch an aggro deck off guard, or it kind of shut them down, a discard deck too. So it's good to have, I suppose.
I think it's really fun with Naveen as well. Like, you probably don't expect on turn 4 to just have a Grab Your Sword come down while they're establishing a forecast character, and I really like the potential to just wipe a board while sticking some characters and keeping your board intact, and then being able to just kind of quest out from there. So the other difference I noticed about this deck, it has not the traditional 4 copies of Storm Rage on, but it's not always a good card depending on what your opponent is playing. And against Blurple, for example, I think if they get that turn 1 bell, you're probably not too excited to sing Storm Rage on and exert your Cinderella interface. So, there's matchups where it's great, but you got to make some sacrifices here, and I think that's where the one Grab Your Sword came in at the expense of a Let the Storm Rage on. And
makes sense to
honestly,
trim it unthinkable to make room.
I didn't really miss it. So overall, I've had a lot of fun with this. I think for my matchups, I had a couple blue-purple matches, and I know that's a favorable matchup for me for this deck. But, in a couple of those games, my hands were just kind of abysmal, and I tried to work with what I had, but I couldn't get there. So I ended up 2-1ing both of those matchups, but it was really on the cusp of being a loss in basically both of them. So I felt like I kind of narrowly got through those.
So you made the top 4 cut.
And then I was able to beat Eternadogs as well in the first round, and I believe we played 4 rounds total, and I cannot remember the other matchup at this point, but we did cut directly to top 4, so I got to go to top 4. And in my top 4 match, I played against probably the one deck I really didn't want to be against that day, and that was Jeebus was playing Ruby Sapphire, and like an item build with coils and Sisus. In the first game, I believe I got to like 18 lore, and if I had found another Whole New World at a better time, or just some more characters, I think I could have gotten there. But at one point, my hand was like 4 songs, and that was it, so I couldn't continue to pressure with characters, and basically I spent the next few turns just kind of removing, his Sisu or whatever big thing he would play, but I couldn't establish my own thing. And eventually I did get a Whole New World, but after that point, he was able to remove whatever I would put down, and then quested out with a big Tamatoa and a pile of items. And then game 2 was kind of going okay, but then I kind of forgot he had Be Prepared because I know previously he hadn't been running that. And so there was a turn where I could have kind of went all in and then played a Pete, but I decided to play more conservatively and not ink a card to go up to enough ink to play the Pete in addition to what I already had. And then, kind of surprised me when he hit the Be Prepared there. I didn't have a huge board, so it didn't save it. It wouldn't have saved like a bunch of lore. But, the fact that I missed out on a few lore there that could have been saved kept me around the 12 to 14 lore mark by the end of the game. And my hand, was a lot worse that game. So ultimately lost to him, but it was a very fun day.
Oh, and he's very good on that Sapphire.
He certainly is.
Ruby in any deck, really. So, yep, but nice friend in the area, too. Always cool to play friends. And now we'll go to the last event of this time around for us, because we will be busy this coming weekend and unable to attend any set champs. But yes, as you can see here, I played Under the Sea, Amber Emerald Discard again. And this deck is basically a direct copy of No I'm Not, or Kendall Burdett's list that he played at the SSG High Roller event.
Looks like you did have that Lucifer there.
And yes, I had just, for a long time, wanted to give this deck a try. I'd maybe played it a little bit here or there, but never for an actual event. So I thought, to give myself some more practice and experience with it, I would give it a go. And I had a lot of fun with it. I think the discarding, I never like to be against discard decks, and it does feel kind of bad making people discard a lot of cards. But, it's a deck out there, and if you're playing competitively, you got to be aware of all the decks. And, if you want to play them, it's fair game. So, I have no issue with that. But, yeah, what I do think that this deck, where it doesn't really suit my playstyle typically, is just the lack of a lot of good statted characters, and then the fact that there's only 4 1-drop characters, and they don't have the best stat lines either. But I know 1-drop characters have kind of become less popular this set for a lot of decks. There's just more powerful things you can be doing with some of the higher costed characters, but this one's definitely an important one here with the Diablo to set up the shift line. Kind of lets you know what your opponent's working with too, and then you can try to plan accordingly. So, if you see your opponent has some removal that'll hit your Diablo, maybe you don't shift it up and play it yet before you've removed the answers they have in hand, or wait for them to ink them or something. And yeah, we both love Steel Song, so again, just being able to play Ariel in a deck that's not really doing the steel removal plan, but is also pretty, problem solving like Steel Song is, and able to pull off different combos that you can work toward and try to sculpt what you're playing toward that result. It's really fun.
This list, the differences appear to be the Lucifer and also the Be Our Guest.
Yep, I played the one Lucifer that he had played. And I also did want to make room for the Daisy, and at one point I was considering a Daisy, and I was also considering the new Dual Ink Tramp that costs 7, where it costs less based on the number of other characters you have in play, and then that lets you draw and discard equal to the number of other characters you have in play. I thought that'd be great for kind of sculpting your hand, because sometimes, let's say you've discarded all your opponent's cards and you've just got a bunch of discard cards in hand that aren't doing anything anymore. The Tramp would be a good way to swap those cards out. There were definitely games where I had a lot of discard like that, and I really just needed characters to start deploying to the board. So, or if you need to find an Under the Sea or something, if Tramp lets you dig 4 cards deeper in the deck, I think that'd be really effective. And I also wanted to try to work in one copy of You're Welcome, just to help remove like a location on the spot or any character. And again, if you've discarded your entire opponent's hand, You're Welcome makes them draw 2 more cards, which then you could use your discard cards with Prince John in play to keep your draw engine going. So, but I ultimately had a hard time making cuts and just decided to play this as it was. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. I loved pulling off the key to combo. I think what was pretty important was trying to figure out, when to deploy certain characters so that you'd have at least 8 costs worth of singers in play. Yep. To be able to sing Under the Sea, because hard casting Under the Sea or paying the full 8 for it, I'm not sure that ever happened. Maybe in one game. A lot of times it was kind of hard to get to that 8 ink, especially when, I will say this deck, playing it feels like you're on the back foot for most of the time. I don't think there was a single matchup I had where I felt like I was leading the charge and being the aggressor, but it really, once it turns the corner and especially, pulls off the Under the Sea combo or just gets rid of the opponent's hand, then
Then it
they
wins
can really stall
fast.
out. And yeah, once you could just turn everything sideways for a couple of turns, maybe close the game, it's effective. But I will say, the first round I was against a Steel Ruby deck, and it was a very cool deck, and it actually was quite effective against some of the things I was trying to do. I won game one by discarding their hand basically, and then game two, they had a Flynn on the board that I could just not get rid of, and there were times where they had just too many characters in play, and that I couldn't quite answer the Flynn, and then they would never exert it and make it available to me. Didn't find the muses to try to bounce it, and then they had Lumiere in play as well, which was making Flynn a 3 strength character, so it wouldn't have been able to bounce, and I didn't have time. They got like 12 lore off of the Flynn, so that was pretty good for them and unfortunate for me. But then game three, it was kind of close. They had a Li Shang that can challenge ready characters, so they were able to actually threaten Prince John with him. So that was pretty scary. And then they also had an evasive Moana that could check the Diablo. So it was a lot of things to play around. But that time I was able to discard their hand as well. And then I moved on to round two, which was against Sapphire Steel. And that was very aggressive. It was lucky I won the dice roll because I won on the play both times and I lost on the draw. And even when in game three, like my opponent got to 19 lore and they were a turn away from winning because they tapped a Cogsworth. I actually did have Under the Sea, so I would have been able to remove that. So, but still, it was very close, and it was good to be on the play for that one for sure. And then in the third round, I ended up facing an Amber Steel, and she was very nice. Her and her husband had just moved to the area. He's actually a game developer, and they were super nice to talk to and meet. But yeah, she was playing Amber Steel and playing it amazingly. Said it's, I think, her favorite deck, or that she's played a lot. And we went to game three. And yeah, we were both top decking for a while in some of the games, and just it was incredibly close. I think she was maybe at 16 or 18 in that third game, and then I was just able to pull it out. And then so that was a nice start, and that was actually round four because round three I met my brother here for the first time this set champ season, and we decided to draw with each other because we didn't want to give the other a loss unnecessarily. And so then I was 3 wins and 1 draw. So then I was able to draw round 5 as well and make the top 8. And then I was able to, I matched into my friend. I was actually the number 1 seed, I think, after that, and matched my friend who was in the 8th seed, I believe. And he was also on Amber Steel. And I had just seen how close that matchup was when I played it in the 4th round. And so I was able to get game 1. And then he got game 2, and then game 3 was very interesting and very grindy, and it was kind of a turn away for either person to maybe win, but he had a lot of clutch Petes that were happening, some whole new worlds, and it was interesting because at one point he had played his 4th whole new world, and I had lost all 4 of my Under the Seas to the discard. I lost 2 of them to one whole new world and 2 of them to another. So I'm like, I'm probably just done now because I can't do the combo anymore. And the one turn I could have done it, he played a Pete, and then a lot of other turns he very smartly removed like a Sir Hiss or whatever I needed that helped me add to that 8-cost singing potential. So he always kept me off of that, and he closed it down and took me out in that round. It was a very fun battle, and props to him because he went on to win the whole event. But yeah, that's what I played. It was a lot of fun. I liked the puzzle of it, trying to figure out how to stop the opponent and then turn the corner and quest to 20. So
I do think it is one of the funner decks you can try.
Yep, and then you went with.
Well, I couldn't resist trying Blurple again. I've done it at least like once for the past few sets, and it seems like it's at its best right now. So I had to get in there as well. This deck, decided to mix it up a little bit from some of what I've seen, but I kind of just mixed and matched a few lists, I guess. I didn't want to have 0 1-drops, so I did play 2 Diablo so that in case I didn't have a Bell, and in case I had a weird turn 2, I might at least have a Diablo and a Crab or a Diablo and a Fox to kind of do something on board. I also like that there's 2 copies of Peter Pan here to rush in with, so it's just another turn 3 thing you could do. It's the quickest answer to a Diablo, really. that you can play. And sometimes if they see your hand and see you have Peter Pan, it might even just prevent them from from questing, and they might decide not to be drawing those cards. And then if that's happening, you're kind of Peter Pan's doing his job from the hand, but as a surprise, he can come out and make that nice trade. It's always good. Really love the Bell this set with the Popsicle combo. It just feels so good to get a 3/3 out on turn one whenever that happens. So I always feel like that's the first little mini game when I'm playing this deck is like, do I have Bell? And if I do, like, do I have Popsicle? Should I look for it? Should I mulligan for it? Sometimes, if you're on the play, it doesn't feel as necessary, but really if you have Bell, Popsicle, and a Friends, that can just get you off to the races, and really fill your hand while keeping the board well statted. And I think that almost nothing seems as powerful as that right now to me. Genie is very good evasive threat that quests nicely, and card draw is always nice. The Iago, I was on 4 of that, and I really found he was doing a ton of work, especially into other blue-purple matchups. I was against like 3 different Blurple decks that day, and I felt like Iago is kind of like the all-star in the deck. If I could ramp on 2, I always wanted to throw down the Iago, because I'm not even sure that most of the decks I was against had an answer for him except maybe Let It Go, and at that point in the game, they're not able to play Let It Go usually, so, and you wouldn't want to really hard cast that and give me some ink. The Jafar was kind of a weird inclusion. Originally it was going to be 3 goats, but I kind of really like the stat line of the Jafar. If you've drawn a lot of cards, then his strength is quite impactful, so it gets around some of the red removal, plus it could threaten locations. Can also just threaten to make good trades on non-evasive characters when you play Elsa the following turn, and it can absorb more damage than a goat, and I like that when you combo it with Bell, potentially getting a trade and then getting a 2-for-1 and cleaning up the damage on your Jafar with Bell. So that's kind of why it was in there. Also, I know there's been some blue-purple Jafar lists that people have tried, and I did think, if you ever play this, maybe they'll think you're on one of those types of lists, and maybe they'll try to remove the Jafar.
So you don't shift it into the Striking Illusionist Jafar?
Exactly. And yeah, a couple opponents looked at it like, ooh, are you doing the thing? And then it was like, I knew I wasn't, but, Anyway, I thought that was kind of funny. It could just be more goats, but I enjoyed seeing the Jafar in my hand.
I like that you played the one Elsa too, because that's a really fun card. The 8 cost Elsa.
Yes, so I had 1 copy of the Spirit of Winter Elsa. I really like trying to close out a game with that. Just tap down their 2 biggest threats and kind of either then push ahead aggressively, or you can trade out whatever she taps down, or at least delay them for a turn there. The one of Cogsworth was kind of, in case you have a slight lead on an Amber Steel in an early game, maybe if you ramped, went into a Genie and then a Cogsworth, like things like that. Just anything you can put on board to make it a little harder for their removal to do its job. Seemed like it might be helpful there. Most of the time he was ink, but I also like that he's got wards, so if you're trying to close a game, he's pretty uninteractable, and he can set up singing Let It Go as well. They can't really stop him from doing that unless they have a way to get the Let It Go out of your hand. I also tried 2 Ursula. I just like the exert ability on her, and yeah, if Amber Steel, for example, maybe you're against that, and if they're having kind of a slow start, if you ramp to her and drop her in, it just kind of makes their next turns a little bit awkward, since they have to pay full cost for any songs they might want to play.
Yeah, and I agree, like the exert ability, maybe you're against an aggressive deck and you finally kind of staved it off, but there's times where you run out of your Elsas to force exerts or Hades or Let It Go, and as long as you have the Ursula in play, it's like anything they play off the top of the deck, you can just make exerted and take it out with the other characters already on board, so that's kind of a way to hedge against, if you do run out of the other kinds of removal.
Yep, and that just, it sets up cards like Bell better too, because if something else gets to make the trade, you still get to quest for 3 with the Ursula and then move some damage around. Maybe you're knocking out a bunch of things while still getting your lore and building your board up bigger. So there's a lot to like about her. I do think she can feel a little slow into some matchups, and if your board isn't very well and you have her down, you might not even want to be questing with her. You might need to use her for trading, and if that's the predicament you find yourself in, then it's probably just a game that you're going to struggle to win. But overall, I really like what she adds to the deck. And then I also was on, the rest of the actions were pretty standard, trying 3 Finders Keepers and 4 Sails for ramp, 4 Friends for the card draw, and the Popsicles to get the Bell online. So Overall, really love this deck. My matchups first, I was against a mid-range Amethyst Steel, and I think that's generally a good matchup for blue purple. I'd rather see the mid-range than like an aggressive version because they'll probably run out of cards a little faster. Well, actually, it's more just that they play like a slower game and they try to use rabbits and maybe Zeus's and stuff for removal. But
and with your ramp, it
eventually,
helps.
like the characters in this deck are just bigger, and Hades being able to dunk kind of anything that they play, you just get rid of their biggest threat and slowly overtake the board, and then from there, I think this deck can kind of start to dominate. So, but my opponent played very, very well. I think I misplayed some, and that allowed them to get to 19 in the first game when I think it shouldn't have been that close. But I was able to get the win there, and then game two felt a lot better for me. So I was able to 2-0 that, and then in round two, I was against a blue-purple player who was doing like manors and also castles, I believe. So they were really trying to set up locations, also using Gastons and Genies, and then the more traditional stuff like Hades. And that was, they were really ramping it out, putting in a lot of locations early on, and I was like needing to deal with that while also answering their board. But I was able to stabilize and shut them off at about 16 lore, and then I kind of did the same thing in game two, so I was able to 2-0 that, and then in round three, I paired into my brother, and we did decide to just intentionally draw. And then in round four, I faced another blue-purple player, and that time I just felt like my deck was really firing, and the Iagos were coming in very big. Or actually, I was against red-purple, like a shark build in round four, and I think this deck just kind of has a lot of answers for the shark deck. And even then, they got me in game two. My hand just kind of stopped doing anything at a certain point. I didn't find any friends, really any card draw, and I just drew a bunch of 3-cost Bell that doesn't do anything. So I had a good lead, but then Pirate's Life started happening, and we went to game three, and I just finished that right as we were going to turns. So it was nice to get that win there, and then I was also able to draw into the top 8. And then for the top 8 match, I played against a blue-purple deck, and they were also doing locations, but they had some interesting cards too, like the Big Madam Mim Dragon, and that was very powerful and helped them get the win in game 2. But then in game 3, I was on the play, and I had a very, very effective curve of Popsicle Bell with friends and ramp, and I believe they missed, they had a Popsicle but no Bell, and then they also missed their ramp on 2, so I already had a Genie and a 1 and 2 drop in play but before they had even played a character. So, and then I got to Elsa tap down their Genie and take it out, and it just felt like kind of impossible to lose at that point. So that was unfortunate draws for them, but worked well for me there. And then in my top 4, I was against an Amethyst Steel, very aggressive dock deck with libraries and the Steel LeFou that you get to play.
That was a very cool deck to watch.
Yeah, you get to play that LeFou for free if you've banished something in a challenge that turn. They were also using the Rush Cogsworth that can give something Rush, and he only costs 1.
Calhoun's great with the Cogsworth as well.
And I guess my problem in that matchup, I did win game 1, but I was on the play and I had the perfect draws, and even when I won, they got to about 16 lore, so I thought, okay, this is probably going to be worse on the draw. And game 2 was pretty bad for me, but then game 3, I think the problem in games 2 and 3 was that whenever they dropped the library, I just did not have any crabs or foxes to efficiently answer it, and I could never remove it in one turn. And then they had a bunch of 1-drops that replaced themselves. So if I attacked into the library, then they just did a bunch of moving and banishing and really filled their hand. And they were able to go super wide. I think there was one turn they had 8 different characters in play, and all of them kind of quest and then eventually get a card. So
and Blurple doesn't deal the best with the wide board all the time.
So I did get myself up to about 18 lore, but I was really trying to find my 8-cost Elsa to stop them from getting 2 lore on the final turn, because then I think I maybe could have gotten there. But I could not find her, and I just couldn't slow them down quite fast enough. So
they got 4 copies.
They got me 2-1. Well, maybe next time I'll play 4 Elsas, because she seems quite good, and I really didn't notice having any uninkable issues with this deck. I think if you can get your friends going early, and the Finders Keepers really helps with that too. Once you've cast that once, you should have kind of a smooth inking for usually the rest of the game. So really loved the deck, thought it was super fun to play, and I would feel comfortable bringing this to another event. I think, the Iago, for how much work I think it did for me, I think I'd be a little afraid of not being able to answer an opposing Iago if I was seeing those as well. So maybe adding a couple of the hypnotic strength or something could be a good answer for that. But overall, really liked the deck and had a lot of fun.
Yeah, so that was our Set Champ season this time around. We were each able, across those 4 events, to earn a playset of the Hero Hamada card, which was really exciting because, yeah, I would kind of like to try this card out in a deck someday, especially maybe with the new set. So it's kind of cool that you can go to a Set Champ and win a card that might see some play in a deck, and the art is phenomenal as well. Very cool there.
Yeah, and mostly it's just, it's fun to go to these tournaments and just try out different decks, socialize with the players, and just have fun, because that's what it's really about.
Yeah, I really enjoy
enjoying Lorcana.
Going to different stores, like sometimes for the first time, just seeing like what's the vibe at this store, who goes there, and then for later, like, yeah, this is a place I could come back to. And a lot of times too, like if we're not at our local stores, we see other friends we've met and made, for maybe an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours away, that we don't get to see until these Set Champs roll around again. And I think just seeing the community that keeps returning to these events and is so engaged with the game, like it's been great to be a part of that. And so we always look forward to these. And yeah, I know there's 1 weekend left, so if any of you are still wondering what to play next time, if any of these lists looked fun to you, you could certainly give them a spin. They did well for us. And yeah,
well, good luck hunting for your heroes if you're playing. And we're also really excited for Reign of Jafar, which is going to be coming out next Friday, so about 8 days from today.
Yes, and there was also an exciting piece of news today. There was a official lore cast by the Ravensburger Company, and they announced the 2 formats that are going to be used at the World Championships at the end of June. And I know one is a sealed format, which is really exciting.
Yeah, that sounds super fun.
Opening like 16 packs across the latest 4 sets, and then needing to build a deck out of that with 3 ink colors. That'll be really fascinating to watch. And then the constructed portion with, I believe you have to make 3 decks that cover all 6 ink combos, and then you get to ban one of your opponent's decks, basically. And then you have to get a win with each of the 2 of yours that weren't banned in a best of 3 match. I think that sounds really exciting and fun, and that'll just add so much like strategic elements to like, well, what 3 color pairs do I bring, and what do I ban, and how do I build the deck so that I feel like no matter what they ban, I'll have a couple other viable options. So I think that'll add to a lot of strategic depth, and we are so excited to watch that and find out more about that later too. But for now, yes, this is our recap of the Set Champ season, and we will be very excited for the Reign of Jafar Set Champs when they come around, and we've even seen some previews from the Fabled Set Championships. It looks like Maleficent will be making a return in a different alternate art form. I know a lot in the community, a lot of people are super pumped for that, and we are too. But yeah, we'll just leave you with this. Thank you so much for tuning in. We do appreciate it, and best of luck to all of you out there who are playing in Set Champs next week.
Yep,
this weekend.
We'll talk to you soon.
Yep, later.